I wish to introduce one of the most unusual persons I have ever known. I am reading from Think and Grow Rich, the Desire chapter. And the author, Napoleon Hill, says, as a fitting climax to this chapter, I wish to introduce one of the most unusual persons I have ever known. I first saw him 24 years ago, a few minutes after he was born. He came into the world without any physical sign of ears, and the doctor admitted, when pressed for an opinion, that the child might be deaf and mute for life. I challenged the doctor's opinion. I had the right to do so. You see, I was the child's father. I, too, reached a decision and rendered an opinion, but I expressed the opinion silently, in the secrecy of my own heart. Sometimes that's all you have to do. You don't always have to speak it out loud right away. The desire can just sit there in your heart and just simmer and burn and simmer, and then eventually it comes to a boil. And when that desire starts to boil, ladies and gentlemen, you have a chief aim. You have a magnificent obsession. You have a target upon which you have taken aim, and you will have it. I decided my son would hear and speak. Nature could send me a child without ears, but nature could not induce me to accept the reality of the affliction. Those of us who've been in Jinn, and those of us who have studied access consciousness, know that both societies have come to the same conclusion, that what we think are laws are not laws at all. They are simply agreements we have made. As access consciousness would say, we've either resisted and reacted, or we've aligned and agreed. Now, Napoleon Hill here, he definitely did not align and agree. You could say he resisted and reacted. He went beyond that. He decided something else. And he focused his mind on that. He did not say, my son will not be deaf, my son will not be mute. He said, my son will hear and he will speak. And there's a big difference between those two decisions. One is saying my life will not be like this. The other is saying my life is this. Now, it may be that what causes you to finally say, this is what my life is seeing something that your life previously was and saying, this sucks, this is done, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm going here. That's fine. The key point is you have to make the decision to go forward. You have a chief aim. You set a target. And that's what Napoleon Hill did here. He didn't dwell on the bad. He persevered toward where he chose his son's life to go. And everything that he imbibed energetically, verbally, and in every way imaginably, vibrationally, you name it, said to that son, I know you can hear me, and I know you can communicate with me. And this is what we are doing until I see the actualization and the realization of that. In my mind, I knew my son would hear and speak. How, you may ask? I was sure there must be a way, and I knew I would find it. I thought of the words of the immortal Emerson. The whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We need only obey. There is guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. Not we might, not we could, not hopefully we'll hear the right word. We shall. That's definite. The right word? Desire. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. My son should hear and speak. From that desire, I never receded, not for a second. See, he took the negative, didn't stay there, moved it to positive, and then stayed focused on the positive. Many years previously, I had written, only our limitations, or our only limitations, are those we set up in our own minds. For the first time, I wondered if that statement were true. An honest reaction. Laying on the bed in front of me was a newly born child without the natural equipment of hearing. Even though he might hear or speak, he was obviously disfigured for life. That was the apparent reality of the time. Surely this was a limitation which that child had not set up in his own mind. See, the kid knew better, and the father did too. Sometimes you have to repeat the same declaration over and over and over and over to yourself until you're fully convinced. And how long do you need to be convinced? Long enough to act. Long enough to act as though it's true in the face of all evidence to the contrary. What could I do about it? Somehow I would find a way to transplant into that child's mind my own burning desire for ways and means of conveying sound to his brain without the aid of ears. As soon as the child was old enough to cooperate, I would fill his mind completely with a burning desire to hear, that nature would, by methods of her own, translate into the physical reality. And all this thinking took place in his own mind. He hadn't yet verbalized it yet. It was a pledge he made to himself. And he talks about as his son grew older, he began to take notice of things around him. We observed that he actually had a slight degree of hearing. Now, what the question I'm burning to ask here is, did he have no hearing, and just because his father had such desire for him to hear, is that why he even had that small capacity to hear at all? Would he have truly had no hearing at all, had his father not imbibed through himself to that child from the day he was born? You are destined to hear, son. You are destined to speak. That's the only way it can be. We could tell by his actions that he could hear certain sounds slightly. That was all I needed to know. I was convinced that if he could hear even slightly, he might develop still greater hearing capacity. Then something happened which gave me hope, which came from an entirely unexpected source. So they bought a Victrola, and when the child heard the music, he went into ecstasies and promptly appropriated the machine, and he felt the vibration. He took his teeth and clamped them on the edge of the case. And it wasn't until years afterwards that Napoleon Hill heard the principle of bone conduction of sound at that time. So he was absorbing through his teeth and then the bones into his being the vibration of the sound. So even if he was only partially hearing here, he was fully receiving the beneficence of the vibration. Now think about that. Those of you who've been in Jinn know that one of the tenets of level 2, and it's also spoken of in the Mega Memory series, that when you speak something out loud, a desire, it goes through tissue and bone directly into the brain because you're speaking it, and you hear it from the inside, as well as the sound vibrations going out come back through your ears and go inside. In fact, 2/3 of your self-talk enters your brain, not through your ears, but through bone and flesh, which is why it is so critically important that your self-talk be that of desire, of what you truly would like life to be, not bitching over what it is or was or what you're afraid it might be. Focus on the positive. Focus on the positive. Focus on this positive. Let that desire burn. He goes on to say, there was one story in particular which I emphasized by giving it some new and dramatic coloring each time it was told. It was designed to plant in his mind the thought that his affliction was not a liability, rather an asset of great value. Despite the fact that all the philosophy I had examined clearly indicated that every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage, I must confess I had not the slightest idea how this affliction could ever become an asset. But yes, reason told me plainly there was no adequate compensation for the lack of years. Desire, backed by faith, pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. Faith transubstantiates hope. Faith takes that which was only hope and works it out to be seen in our physical realm of relief. That's what faith is. And faith is always backed by desire, because the Greek word translated faith means to act based upon belief, sustained by confidence, which is a desire, which is a burning desire, a chief aim, a magnificent obsession that you go to bed with, you think about it while you sleep, you think about it when you wake up, you take it into the shower with you, you think about it while you dress, you feel it all day long while you're doing whatever else you're doing. You're saying, this is how it is, this is how it will be, this is who I am, this is where I'm going. Burning desire. I sold him the idea that when he became old enough to sell newspapers, as his older brother had done, he would have a big advantage over his brother, for the reason that people would pay him extra money for his wares because they could see he was a bright, industrious boy despite having no 2 ears. We could notice that gradually the child's hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self-conscious because of his affliction. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of servicing his mind was bearing fruit. For several months, he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid his deafness made it unsafe for him to go on the street alone. Finally, he took matters into his own hands. Incoming phone calls. The one liability of being live. So he took matters into his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left at home with the servants, he climbed through the kitchen window, shimmied to the ground, set out on his own, borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighborhood shoemaker, invested in papers, sold out, reinvested, kept repeating until late into the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back the 6 cents he had borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents, which when you're 7 years old and living in the 1920s is actually money. You could do stuff with that. You could buy a lot of candy for a nickel. You could buy a candy bar for a penny. When he got home that night, we found him in bed asleep with the money tightly clenched in his fist. His mother opened his hand, removed the coins, and cried, "Of all things!" Crying over her son's first victory seemed so inappropriate. My reaction was the reverse. I laughed heartily, for I knew that my endeavor to plant in the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. So there you go. We would not permit him to learn the sign language. We were determined that he should live a normal life. So, in addition to the desire mixed with faith, which is in action, they also took further actions that said, our son is destined to hear. Our son is a hearer, and he is a speaker. Therefore, sign language ain't for us. Our son is a speaker, a talker, and a hearer. And we'll continue the story from that point on the next video. I want to thank all of you for listening. And if I can figure out how to turn this thing off, back with part 5 at another time.